The checkpoint guard's eyes narrowed with suspicion as she poured his morning espresso. "Something different about you today, Elena," he muttered, watching her steady hands work the machine with military precision. The small cafe bustled with uniformed personnel grabbing their daily caffeine fix, none paying attention to the quiet woman behind the counter. But when she reached for the sugar dispenser, exposing the jagged scar across her palm, one officer froze mid-conversation. His weathered face went pale as recognition flashed in his eyes. This was no ordinary barista. This was no ordinary scar. 20 years of classified history hung in the silence between them, invisible to everyone else, but unmistakable to those who knew. Welcome to Quiet Tales Studio. Before we continue this powerful story of hidden identity and forgotten service, tell us in the comments, from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're growing every day, and your support helps us bring more untold tales to light.
The Sunrise Cafe sat wedged between a military surplus store and a small pharmacy on the outskirts of Fort Morrison, its windows perpetually fogged from the steam of countless coffee orders. Every morning at 0600 hours, the same routine unfolded like clockwork. The first wave of officers would arrive, some still adjusting their uniforms, others already sharp and ready for the day ahead. Elena Martinez moved through the morning rush with practiced efficiency. At 42, she possessed the kind of quiet competence that made customers feel comfortable without really knowing why. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail, her movements economical and precise. She knew every regular by their order: Major Thompson's black coffee with 2 sugars, Lieutenant Collins' double-shot Americano, Sergeant Hayes' elaborate caramel macchiato that seemed at odds with his intimidating exterior. "Morning, Elena." Major Thompson greeted her as he approached the counter, his routine as predictable as sunrise itself. "The usual?" "Already brewing, Major," she replied with a small smile, her voice carrying just the faintest trace of an accent that most assumed was from her childhood in New Mexico. The truth was more complicated, but truth often was. The cafe had become Elena's refuge 3 years ago, when she'd arrived in the small military town with nothing but a backpack and enough cash to rent the failing coffee shop from its previous owner. The locals accepted her quickly enough. Military communities understood starting over, understood the need for fresh beginnings without too many questions about the past. What they didn't understand was that some pasts never truly ended. That particular Tuesday morning started like any other. The pre-dawn darkness gave way to pale sunlight as Elena prepared for the morning rush. She'd been up since 0400 as always, ensuring everything was perfect. The espresso machine hummed with warmth, pastries arranged with geometric precision, newspapers folded and ready for the officers who preferred to read while they drank. At exactly 0615, the door chimed as the first customer entered. Captain Marcus Rivera, a man Elena had served nearly every day for 2 years without incident. He was younger than most of the regulars, with sharp features and observant eyes that suggested intelligence work rather than standard infantry. "Double espresso, no sugar," Elena recited his order before he could speak. "You never forget," Rivera said with appreciation, settling into his usual spot near the window where he could observe both the street and the cafe's interior, a habit that Elena recognized but had never commented upon. As she worked the machine, steam hissing and coffee dripping into the small ceramic cup, Elena felt the familiar comfort of routine. This was her life now. Simple, predictable, safe. The opposite of everything that had come before. But safety, as Elena had learned long ago, was often an illusion. She was reaching for the sugar dispenser when it happened. The motion required her to stretch across the counter, extending her left hand fully. The sleeve of her shirt rode up slightly, exposing her palm and the distinctive scar that ran from her thumb to her wrist in a jagged line that spoke of old violence and careful surgery. Captain Rivera's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips, his eyes locked onto that scar with the intensity of someone seeing a ghost. The color drained from his face as he set the cup down slowly, never breaking eye contact with Elena's hand. "Madre de Dios," he whispered, the Spanish slipping out before he could catch himself. Elena's blood turned to ice. She pulled her hand back immediately, but it was too late. The damage was done. After 3 years of careful anonymity, someone had finally recognized the mark that connected her to a life she'd tried desperately to leave behind. "Problem with your coffee, Captain?" she asked, her voice steady despite the alarm bells screaming in her head. Rivera stood slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. "Could I speak with you privately? In the back?" It wasn't really a request. Elena glanced around the cafe. Several other officers were scattered at tables, absorbed in their newspapers and morning conversations. The next wave of customers wouldn't arrive for another 20 minutes. She nodded once and led Rivera toward the small office behind the counter. The office was cramped, barely large enough for a desk, 2 chairs, and the filing cabinets that held receipts and inventory records. Elena gestured for Rivera to sit, but remained standing herself, positioning herself between him and the door. Old habits. "Operative Shadow," Rivera said quietly, using a name Elena hadn't heard in over 5 years. She didn't deny it. Denial was pointless now. "Captain Rivera," she acknowledged, her voice taking on a different quality. Harder, more controlled. "I take it you're not really assigned to base logistics." "Military intelligence," he confirmed, "assigned to monitor regional security threats. I've been watching this area for 2 years, never knowing that one of the most wanted intelligence assets in Central America was serving me coffee every morning." Elena's hand moved instinctively toward her hip, where years ago she would have carried a sidearm. Finding nothing there reminded her of how completely she'd tried to leave that world behind. "Wanted by whom?" she asked. 3 governments, 2 cartel organizations, and at least 1 private military contractor. Rivera replied matter-of-factly, "Though I suspect you know that already." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Elena studied Rivera's face, looking for tells, for signs of immediate threat. He appeared calm, professional, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "The scar," Rivera continued, "from the Caracas extraction, 2019. You took shrapnel, saving my extraction team when the safe house was compromised." Elena's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "You were part of Jaguar Squad." "Lieutenant Rivera, then. You pulled 3 of us out when intelligence failed and we walked into an ambush. Martinez, Chen, and myself. You took shrapnel in your hand and a bullet in your shoulder, but you got us to the extraction point." The memory came flooding back, despite Elena's attempts to keep it buried. The safe house in flames, the sound of automatic weapons fire, the weight of Chen's unconscious body as she dragged him toward the helicopter. The young lieutenant, Rivera, covering their retreat with precise rifle fire while blood ran down her arm. "Chen didn't make it," Rivera said softly. "Died 3 days later from his injuries." "I know." Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. "I attended his funeral, unofficially." Rivera leaned forward, his expression intense but not threatening. "Elena, what happened in Venezuela?" "The official reports were classified beyond my clearance level, but the rumors, they said Operation Nightfall was betrayed from within. That someone in the intelligence community sold out the entire network." Elena was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "Someone did. But it wasn't one of us in the field." "Then who?" "Someone with access to mission parameters, safe house locations, extraction routes. Someone who knew our operational names and could track our movements." Elena's voice hardened. "Someone who could disappear entire teams and make it look like operational failures." Rivera's face darkened as the implications sank in. "How high up?" "High enough to bury investigations. High enough to classify anyone who survived as potential security risks. High enough to put bounties on our heads and call it national security." The full picture began to form in Rivera's mind. "You didn't disappear because you went rogue. You disappeared because you were marked for elimination. Along with 12 other operatives who survived the Venezuelan network collapse. Last I heard, 3 of us were still alive." Elena moved to the small window that looked out onto the alley behind the cafe. "Now you understand why Elena Martinez makes coffee and keeps her head down." Rivera stood slowly, processing everything he'd learned. The intelligence reports labeled you as a traitor who stole classified materials and disappeared. Convenient story, clean and simple. Elena turned back to face him. What happens now, Captain? Are you here to arrest me? To verify my location for someone else? No, Rivera said firmly. I'm here because I owe you my life. And because if what you're saying is true, then the people who betrayed Operation Nightfall are still out there, still in positions of power. Elena studied his face carefully. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But Rivera's presence here, his reaction to seeing her, suggested something other than official business. Why are you really stationed here, Captain? She asked. Rivera hesitated, then made a decision. Because 3 months ago I started investigating discrepancies in intelligence reports from Central and South America. Patterns that suggested systematic manipulation of field operations. My superior suggested I might benefit from a quiet assignment away from active investigations. They buried you. They tried to. But they made one mistake. They sent me to the exact place where someone with direct knowledge of their operations was hiding in plain sight. Elena felt a familiar sensation, the electric tension that preceded dangerous decisions. What exactly are you proposing, Captain? I'm proposing that we finish what Operation Nightfall started. That we identify the people responsible for betraying our assets and destroying our networks. That we make sure Chen and the others didn't die for nothing. The office fell silent except for the distant sound of the espresso machine cycling through its cleaning routine. Elena walked to her desk and opened the bottom drawer, removing a small metal box that had been hidden beneath old invoices and tax records. Inside the box was a single flash drive. Insurance, she explained, holding up the device. Everything I could gather before I disappeared. Names, dates, financial transfers, operational codes. Enough to bring down a network that's been selling American intelligence assets for years. Rivera stared at the drive as if it were a live grenade. How long have you been sitting on this? 3 years. Waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right opportunity. Elena met his eyes. Congratulations, Captain. You just became that opportunity. But before Rivera could respond, the front door of the cafe chimed, and voices drifted back toward the office. Not the usual morning customers. These voices carried authority and urgency. Elena and Rivera exchanged a quick glance. She moved silently to the office door and peered through the crack. 3 men in dark suits had entered the cafe, their movements coordinated and professional, not customers. How did you get here this morning? Elena whispered. Personal vehicle, unmarked. Did anyone know you were coming here specifically? Rivera's face went pale as he understood the implication. I logged my off-base breakfast in the duty roster. Standard procedure. Elena cursed softly in Spanish. They've been monitoring you, waiting to see if you'd make contact with anyone connected to your investigation. The voices in the main cafe grew louder, more insistent. Someone was asking about the owner, about whether she was on the premises. Back exit? Rivera asked. Elena shook her head. Blocked. I checked it every morning for 3 years. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Elena made a decision born of years of operational experience. She handed Rivera the flash drive. There's a loose floorboard under the desk. Hide this. If something happens to me, take it to Colonel Sarah Chen. She's David Chen's sister. Works Pentagon intelligence. She'll know what to do with it. Elena, I'm not leaving you here. You're not leaving me. You're completing the mission. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded life-and-death operations. That drive is the only evidence that can expose the network. It's more important than either of us. Rivera quickly secured the drive in the hiding place Elena indicated. The voices outside were getting closer, and they could hear someone moving through the cafe, checking behind the counter. Is there another way? Rivera asked. Elena smiled grimly and moved to what appeared to be a supply closet. Behind the cleaning supplies was a small panel that opened to reveal a crawl space leading to the adjacent building. Military communities aren't the only ones who understand the value of exit strategies, she said. As Rivera prepared to enter the crawl space, Elena grabbed his arm. Captain, when you use that drive, remember something. The people who betrayed us aren't just criminals. They're patriots. who convinced themselves that selling out field operatives was necessary for the greater good. That makes them more dangerous than any cartel. What about you? I've been Elena Martinez for 3 years. Time to see if I remember how to be Shadow. Rivera disappeared into the crawlspace just as the office door burst open. 3 armed men entered, weapons drawn but not aimed. Professional courtesy. They weren't here to kill her immediately. Ms. Martinez, the lead agent said calmly, we need you to come with us. There are some questions about your immigration status that require clarification. Elena raised her hands slowly, playing the role of frightened cafe owner. I don't understand. My papers are all in order. I'm sure they are, but we need to verify a few details. Nothing to worry about. As they escorted her from the cafe, Elena caught a glimpse of Rivera's vehicle still parked outside. Good. He was following protocol, waiting to ensure she was clear before making his own exit. The ride to wherever they were taking her was conducted in professional silence. Elena used the time to study her captors, noting details that might be useful later. Lead agent's expensive watch, the driver's military bearing, the way the third man kept checking his phone for updates. They weren't government agents, at least not officially. The destination turned out to be a warehouse on the industrial side of town, far from the base and the civilian areas. As they escorted her inside, Elena noticed the sophisticated communication equipment, the maps of Central America, the photographs of various individuals pinned to a corkboard. Her own photograph was among them. "Welcome home, Shadow," a familiar voice said from the shadows. Elena's blood froze as a figure stepped into the light. Colonel James Morrison, her former commanding officer from Operation Nightfall. The man she had trusted with her life. The man who had sent her team into Venezuela. The man who had betrayed them all. "Hello, James," she said calmly. "I wondered when you'd finally show up." Morrison looked older, grayer, but his eyes held the same cold calculation Elena remembered. "You've caused quite a bit of trouble, Elena, disappearing like that, making people nervous." People get nervous when they have guilty consciences. Morrison smiled without warmth. "Always direct. I admired that about you. It's also what made you predictable." Elena studied the warehouse setup, the personnel, the exit points. Years of tactical training kicked in automatically, even as she maintained her composed exterior. "Predictable enough to stay hidden for 3 years," she replied. "That's either poor planning on your part, or you wanted me to be found." Morrison nodded approvingly. "Both, actually. We needed you to surface, but on our terms." Captain Rivera's investigation was becoming inconvenient. Having him discover you provided the perfect solution. Elena felt the pieces clicking into place. "You've been feeding him information, leading him toward me." Rivera is talented but naive. He believes in justice and accountability, noble qualities that make him useful for our purposes. Morrison moved closer, his voice taking on the tone he'd once used during mission briefings. "You see, Elena, the Venezuela operation wasn't a failure. It was a necessary sacrifice." Necessary for whom? For the greater stability of the region. The intelligence we were gathering would have destabilized 3 governments and triggered a continental crisis. Sometimes operational success means knowing when to fail strategically. Elena's voice remained steady, but her eyes blazed with controlled fury. "You murdered 12 operatives to protect political stability? I saved thousands of lives by preventing a regional war," Morrison countered. "The cartels we were tracking had connections to legitimate governments. Exposing them would have collapsed the peace accords, triggered military coups, and sent millions of refugees streaming north. So you made a deal." Morrison nodded. "With people who understand that real power requires difficult choices, the cartels got to maintain their operations in exchange for providing intelligence on terrorist networks. Everyone won, except the operatives you sacrificed." "Acceptable losses for the greater good," Morrison's expression hardened. "You were supposed to die in Caracas, Elena. Your survival was inconvenient, but your disappearance solved that problem until now." Elena processed this information while calculating her options. The warehouse had minimal cover, too many armed personnel, and only one practical exit. But she'd survived worse odds. "What happens now, James? Another convenient accident?" That depends on you. The flash drive you've been hiding, we know you have it. Hand it over and you can return to being Elena Martinez. We'll even relocate you, give you a new identity, a comfortable life." Elena laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "And if I refuse?" Morrison gestured to one of his men, who produced a tablet showing surveillance footage. The screen displayed Captain Rivera entering the cafe that morning, their conversation in the office, and his escape through the crawlspace. "Captain Rivera has been very helpful, even without knowing it. He led us to you, and now he has whatever evidence you've been hoarding. We'll pick him up within the hour." Elena's mind raced. Rivera was walking into a trap, carrying the only evidence that could expose Morrison's network. She had to warn him, but first she had to survive this conversation. "You know, James, for someone who claims to make strategic decisions, you've made one critical error." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Enlighten me." "You assumed I was working alone." The warehouse lights suddenly cut out, plunging the space into darkness. In the confusion that followed, Elena heard the distinctive sound of suppressed gunfire and Morrison shouting orders to his men. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie shadows throughout the warehouse. 3 of Morrison's personnel were down, taken out by precision shots from unknown positions. Elena had used the darkness to move behind a stack of shipping crates. "Shadow status?" a voice called from the warehouse entrance. Elena's heart jumped. She recognized that voice, though she hadn't heard it in 5 years. "Phoenix, is that you?" she called back. "Affirmative. Sorry we're late. Traffic was hell." Marcus Torres stepped into the emergency lighting, older and more weathered than Elena remembered, but unmistakably her former teammate from Operation Nightfall. He wasn't alone. 2 other figures emerged from concealed positions, moving with the fluid precision of special operations veterans. Morrison's remaining personnel found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered by operators who had spent years perfecting the art of urban warfare. "Stand down!" Morrison commanded his men, raising his hand slowly. "This doesn't have to escalate." Torres approached Elena's position, keeping his weapon trained on Morrison. "You okay, Shadow?" "Better now. How did you find me?" "We've been tracking Morrison's network for 2 years. When we learned he was moving on you, we accelerated our timeline." Torres smiled grimly. "Besides, Wraith here has been monitoring intelligence traffic. She flagged Rivera's investigation weeks ago." From the shadows stepped a woman Elena recognized as Maria Santos, another Nightfall survivor. Her code name had been Wraith, and her specialty had been electronic intelligence. "Your Captain Rivera is clean," Santos reported, "but his investigation triggered automatic alerts in Morrison's monitoring system. They've been watching him since he started digging into the Venezuela files." Elena felt relief wash over her. Rivera wasn't part of the conspiracy. He was just an honest officer who had stumbled onto something bigger than he realized. Morrison, meanwhile, was calculating his own options. "Elena, you don't understand the complexity of what we've built. The intelligence network we've established has prevented more terrorist attacks than you can imagine." By selling out American operatives, Torres interjected. "We know about the deals, Morrison. The cartel intelligence, the arms shipments, the political assassinations, all sanctioned through your network." Morrison's expression shifted, becoming more desperate. "You think exposing this will make things better? You'll collapse intelligence operations across 2 continents. You'll get people killed." Elena stepped out from behind the crates, her voice carrying the authority she'd once wielded as a field commander. "People are already getting killed, James. The difference is, now, they'll be the right people." Santos had been working on a tablet while the confrontation unfolded. "Shadow, I've accessed Morrison's communications system. He's got a team moving on Rivera's position right now." Elena cursed. "Can you contact him?" "Negative. They're jamming local communications to prevent exactly that." Elena made a command decision. "Torres, Santos, secure Morrison and his intel. I'm going after Rivera." "Elena, wait," Morrison called as she headed for the exit. "Rivera isn't the only one at risk. We know about Chen's sister, about the Pentagon contact. Cross us, and everyone connected to this gets burned." Elena paused, then turned back with a cold smile. "James, you just made another strategic error. You threatened a Gold Star family member." That's the kind of mistake that gets people killed very, very quietly. Torres nodded understanding. We'll handle things here. Go get your captain. Elena commandeered one of Morrison's vehicles, a black SUV with government plates that would get her through base security without questions. As she drove toward Fort Morrison, she used the vehicle's encrypted communication system to contact a number she'd memorized but never hoped to use. Overwatch. A voice answered after 2 rings. This is Shadow. Authentication Charlie 77 Alpha. A pause then. Authentication confirmed. Shadow, you are listed as KIA. This is irregular. Overwatch. I need immediate support for Operation Nightfall cleanup. Priority Alpha. Stand by. Elena knew she was taking an enormous risk. Overwatch was the emergency coordination center for deep cover operations, but after 3 years of being officially dead, using it could expose her to additional threats. Shadow authentication verified through secondary channels. What do you need? I have a friendly asset in immediate danger. Coordinates Fort Morrison base housing, building 247. Hostile extraction team inbound. I need intercept and secure. Copy, Shadow. Overwatch teams are 20 minutes out. Can you reach your asset? Working on it. Elena pushed the SUV harder, weaving through morning traffic as she raced toward the base. Rivera was walking into an ambush, carrying evidence that could expose a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of military intelligence. As she approached the base gates, Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Coffee was excellent this morning, thanks for the recommendation. Myas R. She smiled despite the tension. Rivera was alive and thinking tactically. The message meant he'd successfully retrieved the flash drive and was following evasion protocols. But Morrison's team would be following their own protocols, and Elena knew they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who posed a threat to their operation. She reached the base gates and flashed her forged credentials, documents Santos had prepared years ago as insurance. The guard waved her through without a second glance. Building 247 was a standard base housing unit where Rivera had been assigned quarters during his, quote, administrative assignment. Elena parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, using her knowledge of base layout to stay in the blind spots of security cameras. As she neared Rivera's building, she spotted them, 3 men in civilian clothes positioned around the structure, not military, not official federal agents. Private contractors, the kind Morrison's network used for operations that needed complete deniability. Elena circled around to the back of the building, where she found an unlocked maintenance door. Years of infiltration training served her well as she moved silently through the building's service corridors. Rivera's apartment was on the 3rd floor. Elena used the building's internal stairwell to reach the 2nd floor, then accessed the utility space above the ceiling tiles. It was cramped and dusty, but it allowed her to move without being detected. Through the thin ceiling material, she could hear conversation from Rivera's apartment. Multiple voices, Rivera and at least 2 others. Captain, we're going to need you to come with us, an unfamiliar voice was saying. There are some questions about your activities this morning. What kind of questions? Rivera's voice was calm, professional. Questions about national security, about unauthorized contact with foreign intelligence assets. Elena carefully lifted a ceiling tile to get a visual on the situation. Rivera was standing in his living room, hands visible, while 2 armed men flanked him. Professional positioning, but they were focused on Rivera rather than maintaining full situational awareness. Fatal mistake. Elena dropped silently into the apartment behind the nearest contractor, her arm locking around his throat before he could react. The second man spun toward the disturbance, giving Rivera the opening to tackle him from the side. In less than 10 seconds, both contractors were unconscious on Rivera's floor. Captain, Elena said quietly, we need to leave, now. Rivera stared at her in amazement. How did you… Later. Do you have the drive? He nodded, producing the flash drive from a hidden pocket in his uniform jacket. Elena smiled. Good, because we're about to end this once and for all. As they prepared to leave Rivera's apartment, Elena's phone buzzed with a message from Torres. Package secured. Network compromised. Recommend immediate extraction. What's the plan? Rivera asked as they moved toward the door. The plan, Elena said, is to disappear James Morrison and his entire network, permanently. But as they opened the apartment door, they found themselves facing the third contractor, who had been stationed in the hallway. This one was faster, more alert, and his weapon was already drawn. Step back inside, he ordered, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of field operations. Elena and Rivera complied, but Elena was already calculating angles, distances, and probabilities. The contractor was skilled, but he was also operating alone and didn't know about Elena's capabilities. "Call it in," the contractor said into his radio. "Package is secure, both targets contained." That's when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in seconds later, but it was too late. Elena had used the darkness to disarm the contractor and position him between herself and Rivera. When the lights returned, the situation had completely reversed. "Your turn to make a call," Elena told the contractor, handing him his radio. "Tell your people that the packages are gone and they should abort the operation." The contractor hesitated, then spoke into the radio. "Control, this is 7. Packages have moved. Repeat, packages are mobile. Recommend immediate withdrawal." Elena smiled approvingly. "Smart choice." As they left the building, Rivera shook his head in amazement. "How did you know the lights would go out?" "I didn't, but Santos has been monitoring base systems since this morning. She's very good at creating convenient technical difficulties." They reached Elena's borrowed SUV without further incident. As they drove away from the base, Elena's phone rang. Torres was calling. "Shadow, we have a problem." Morrison activated a dead man's switch. "If he doesn't check in every 6 hours, automated systems will release classified information about every Operation Nightfall survivor to hostile intelligence networks." Elena cursed. "How long do we have?" 4 hours and change." Rivera looked confused. "What does that mean?" Elena explained quickly. "It means Morrison has one final card to play. If we expose him, he'll expose every surviving Nightfall operative to assassination by foreign agents and criminal organizations." "So what do we do?" Elena thought for a moment, then smiled grimly. "We play a better card." She turned to Rivera. "Captain, how would you like to help save the lives of American intelligence operatives, while simultaneously exposing a conspiracy that reaches into the Pentagon?" "I'd say that sounds like exactly the kind of mission I signed up for." Elena nodded. "Good. Because we're about to show Morrison what happens when you threaten the wrong people." The next 4 hours would determine whether Operation Nightfall finally achieved its true objective, not just gathering intelligence, but ensuring that those who served in the shadows could step back into the light without fear. As they drove toward their final confrontation, Elena reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. 3 years ago, she'd been a barista trying to forget her past. This morning, she was once again Shadow, fighting to protect the people who had trusted her with their lives. Some missions, she realized, never really ended. They just waited for the right moment to resume. And that moment had finally arrived. The war for justice was about to begin, fought not on distant battlefields but in the shadows where the real battles for freedom were always won or lost. Elena Martinez was gone. Shadow had returned. And she was bringing friends.